Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Everyone is Off with Their Family edition of At Percussion. Thus, the internet is unpredictable and strange, and we will see. But today is December 27th, 2015, and this is episode 23. With me, as always, are Megan Arns,
Hello.
Laurel Black,
Hi.
and Ben Charles.
Hi, everybody.
Our two guests today are David Arns and Robert Dillon, sitting beside Megan, and Mr. Arns has received multiple teaching awards. He's an associate professor of marketing in the School of Business and Entrepreneurship at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri, where he also serves as the university's faculty athletics representative. Robert Dillon, to Megan's left right there, he has subbed with Chicago Symphony, Boston Symphony, and the San Diego Symphony. Let's see, he's performed in several contemporary ensembles in Chicago, and is a performing member and development director at Third Coast Percussion Quartet, which I think if you're a friend of the podcast, you know. So, hey guys, how was your holiday?
Great.
Fantastic.
Little too warm, a little bit too wet.
Ours is definitely too wet. Laurel and I are joining you all from my brother's house in Oahu on Lanikai Beach. It's really beautiful, but we have a little internet delay, I think. But otherwise, it's pretty awesome.
Must be rough.
Yeah, it's rough, Ben. How's the weather in Richmond?
It is. It's not cold, which is nice, but it is very wet here as well.
So I noticed that in the news on Christmas Eve, I don't know if you guys noticed that a certain band announced that they will be going all streaming. Yeah, have you heard of this band, Ben? The Beatles?
I have. They're actually my favorite band.
You know what? I'm not into the Beatles. I'm just not into them. I don't know why. I know it's my own problem.
And Laurel still married you.
I know. You didn't know that at the time. It's not like I dislike them. I don't know. I just don't get it. I can't get into it. But anyway, the Beatles announced that as of December 24th, they'll be joining all the standard streaming services, and they had already been with iTunes for several years, but it did take 7 years to get on board with iTunes, and like a lot of negotiations, and it seems like it took them a long time to I guess kind of catch on to the notion that this is how music circulates these days. And let's see, in a New York Times article, it said this month Warner Music Group, one of the so-called big three labels, said that streaming revenue exceeded download revenue for a year. Other classic rock groups such as AC/DC and Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd have started to hop on board to this, and now the Beatles finally have. And then in a little article on ABC News, Chris Hine, who is a Adweek technology editor, said, "To me, hearing this news is hearing the last breath of the compact disc." What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. One thing, I'm relatively new to streaming music as well. I think I just got it over the summer or something like that. And for, I think, a lot of these classic rock groups and also just classical music, I found, like, if I'm trying to study Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, to go out and buy 10 different recordings of that is just, it's unaffordable after a certain point of, how many pieces can you do that? Or there's such a large back catalog of, Beatles albums or Led Zeppelin albums. And if you want to listen to this music, you literally have to invest hundreds of dollars into it all at once. So I think it's nice in a sense that all this music I can pay $10 a month and have readily accessible.
So I definitely love it as well. I think it's fantastic that we have that ability, and I find myself on my home computer where I've got all my music from, ever since I was a little kid, and I want to listen to something, and even though it's sitting right there on my hard drive, and I could go grab it and put it in a Windows Media Player playlist, I also have Spotify open, and I will go find it on Spotify and listen to it. Even though there's ads, and I'm not a paid subscriber yet, I will listen to the ads. Just there's something about the convenience of that right there, and also just knowing, hey, some of this money I can actually keep paying some of these artists, even though I already bought their album when I was 15. It's kind of neat to know, like, wow, I could keep sending them just a little bit of money, or at least supporting the industry, just by listening to it on Spotify instead of on my download. What do you guys think as far as people in our seats? So percussionists and people who maybe say Third Coast Percussion, and you guys are making CDs. How do you feel about putting your efforts into the physical CD versus, hey, the wind's really blowing this other way, we should all just dump all our energy, money, and effort into all digital things and YouTube videos and that sort of thing. What do you think of that, Rob?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think the direction that things are going is pretty clear, and obviously the streaming thing seems to be taking over. I can sort of see for a group like the Beatles the sort of hesitation about getting on board with that. They have some leverage to work with still, obviously, as the Beatles. They're not necessarily worried about like exposure. People know who the Beatles are, and in that format, like in the big picture, probably. As far as my current understanding, like streaming is probably the least profitable for the artist as compared to paid downloads, and then physical media being the most profitable in terms of when you actually sell it. But for most artists, especially new people coming up, the reality is like streaming is the way it's going to work. And as a new artist that people don't know, you're not going to fight against that current of of movement. But I think for a group like us, and I think this is more and more true for most musicians, like you think about live performance being the way that you generate revenue way more than like selling CDs or selling downloads or streaming or any of the recorded media necessarily doesn't feel like that's your revenue source. You rely on live performance, and so all the other things are sort of a way to in some way support that.
Yeah, and Casey and I have talked about this before, and I know I've seen I saw Gordon Stout, I remember on Facebook one time, kind of commented about it, and Gordon said you used to be able to record an album and sell it and actually earn money off of your recording, and now with the streaming stuff, you're not really earning a sizable amount of money based on your recordings, and we've touched on it a little bit before. Casey called it a different type of currency, where Casey obviously has made quite a few YouTube videos that he's basically giving away his art for free, but it's paid dividends in other ways with exposure that has, that's how I met Casey, and I ended up bringing him to my university to play because of it. And Casey could talk more about Casey, obviously, than me. But yeah, I know Casey talked about it also had maybe some bearing on the getting the James Madison job for him and, other opportunities like that.
Yeah, I think certainly it's hard to put a price tag on exposure exactly, and I'm glad Rob said the Beatles could do that because they're the Beatles. They're not worried about getting out there. So people who are lesser known, like say myself, coming up and trying to just get out there at all, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense to go to some type of streaming platform and like easy access platform. But actually, that's something they said in this ABC News article. The question was, or excuse me, the title of the article was, why did it take so long for the Beatles to join streaming? And one of their representatives said, well, because they can. They don't need this help.
Yeah.
They can afford to do it exactly how they want to, and they can afford to take their time with this and kind of figure it out, and they're not just desperate for any type of listening that's out there. So I don't know. It was a news item. I thought it was kind of interesting.
Have you read anything about this, or you?
No, for the older demographic in your audience, if you have an older demographic in your audience, I was having this. You do great. I was having this flashback to 1968. The Beatles' White Album is what got me through my freshman year in Carbondale, Illinois. So anytime anybody can experience that, whether it's streaming or with the vinyl album, go for it. But I'm presuming I didn't read the article and I've been following the story, but do the Beatles themselves, their heirs, their estates, do they still benefit from this? And as artists, whether they're the Beatles or whether they're Third Coast or whomever they are, if streaming can still provide with royalties and income, if it's fair, then it's fine. If it broadens their base.
Yeah, and I know when the whole digital music revolution started, a lot of people were stealing music, basically, using Napster or whatever. And Steve Jobs was the one that said people don't want to steal music. It's just that's the only convenient way to get it. And so that's kind of what started all this off. And then there's been this battle of balancing, convenience with price to try and get people to pay a fair price for it and still be willing to pay that price.
It's really the Napster wave. I don't know if you guys remember, like Kazaa, LimeWire, Napster, BearShare. Audio Galaxy, if you remember that one. Like, you could find anything. Like, I could find all this music that I just didn't have access to on by any means, whether I wanted to pay for it or not. I had that City Life Steve Reich album when I was in high school, and just through Audio Galaxy and Napster, I found all this other Steve Reich stuff that otherwise I had no idea how to get, and also bootleg recordings, which of course that's what we see all over the place. Maybe it's almost too abundant today. But I'm also glad you said vinyl, David, because do you guys know Morris Palter's latest release, his solo CD, and that it's on record only?
Oh, wow.
I did not know that.
Yeah, more and more.
Yeah.
That's the hottest thing. People are buying. I can't remember who it was, but they're buying up all of the ways to make the vinyl, and because it really is, it still commands a very, very small portion of the market, but it's really increasing proportion-wise.
Yeah.
It's also nice with. I was gonna say it's also nice with vinyl that you like. Not only do you get the art, as in the music, but it's actually like it's a work of art itself. It's a physical thing.
Of course, yeah. I was tempted to bring Morris on this to try to ask him to come on, because I knew we would talk about this little thing, but we'll have him on by himself at some point, I'm sure. But something he said, which I thought was really important, cool statement, is he said, well, vinyl's great because you have to listen to it. Like, you have to take some effort and listen to the thing. And also, not everyone has record players sitting all over the place anymore. So if you really want to listen to this, you're going to have to consciously make an effort to listen to it, and you're going to have to listen to it from, more than likely at least the duration of one song, and at least, and then also you're going to give it your attention. It's not going to be in this quick YouTube, quick MP3 download, listen to it in the car kind of thing, which I thought was such a really cool decision on his part, because of course it means he doesn't sell as many of these. But it means stands in like a really, really neat
He's
way.
like demanding a different kind of listener or listening experience. It's interesting. We should do at Percussion Vinyl, probably.
Mail order.
Yeah, we probably should.
1 a week.
Well, and speaking of all this stuff, just another reminder that all Laurel's efforts were successful. To any of you watching who maybe just want to listen, we're on iTunes now, and it's all free. The plan is to never charge a penny for any of this, so it's there in audio format as well if you're interested.
Oh.
Megan, do you want to fire some Facebook questions to your dad and Rob there?
Sure. Let's start. Okay, Ted Jackson asked 2 questions, and they're completely different questions, one for each of you. So let's start with Dad first. What are the basic rules and strategies of marketing, just to give us some background of the field?
I think probably the basic rule of marketing is to line up your target market, identify your target market, and then line up your marketing mix of the product, price, place, and promotion. Those 2 things have to come together in unison, and that's your marketing strategy. Most people, as I was looking at some of these questions, a lot of people ask questions, a lot of people, and not just in the music business, but in any business, tend to jump to one of the 4 Ps, which is the promotion side, selling, advertising, things like that. And I always try to encourage people to back up a little bit, get back to your marketing strategy, figure out what are you doing, why are you doing it, who are you doing it to, how are you going to do it, how are you going to price it out. And it's all based on your selected target market. But we tend, and everybody in every industry, large companies, small companies, small businesses, everybody wants to get into the promotion side. Everybody wants to start talking to their target market without really backing up first and doing a couple of things before they get into the promotional side. And a lot of marketing money is wasted because we jump into promotion too soon.
Do you maybe want to tell us a little bit about your dissertation topic? Because I think it does tie into musicians a lot, and yeah. He's finishing his PhD right now. Even though he's been teaching for a long time, he's working on a PhD. And go ahead, you can
It's
tell us about
a rather late in life endeavor, and it occurred as a result of a dare with Megan. When Megan said she was going to pursue her terminal degree, I said, "All right, what the heck? I'll do mine too." So
We're racing.
we're racing to see who gets their degree finished first. I think Megan's going to beat me.
I'm losing, actually, now.
All that percussion thing is going to slow her down a ton. Like this is so much work. Ever since we started this, everyone's career is just like going straight.
I use an application-based approach in my marketing classes, where I do what I just said I did. I try to back people up a little bit to the strategy, and I run a as I move through the course, the 14 weeks of the course, and covering all the marketing basics. I have my students develop a marketing plan, a strategic marketing plan on a company called Me Incorporated. Me Incorporated is them. They need to develop a strategic marketing plan, from setting their mission statement, goals and objectives, their SWOT analysis, their identification of the target market, the development of their marketing mix, all the way to the back end of implementation, evaluation, control. Everything is about them. And so they develop a strategic marketing plan to gain a competitive advantage. And it's pretty neat. I've been using it for about 15 years in the classroom, and so my dissertation is going to put all of the worksheets and all of the material together to support just any you can use it in any marketing class. But it's a real life application based approach to marketing. So it's not. I mean, 20-somethings might look at marketing in a very abstract way, when it really should be very, very practical application to them. And that's what my dissertation is going to be about.
Wow, wonderful. Yeah, how about another one, Megan?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this one's for Rob. How has Third Coast continued to grow while already being one of the premier chamber groups, and how do you plan out your concerts, trips, and residencies throughout the year? And that's, again, from Ted Jackson.
Yeah, it's a great question. This is something that we, I think, keep struggling with and keep coming back to. We're actually in the midst this year of this process of strategic planning with our board of directors. Third Coast has a board of directors in addition to 4 musicians, and we have 1 additional staff member now. So we've all been working together on this strategic plan, which sort of asks us to look at, like, where do we want to be? Where do we want to be 5 years from now? How do we move towards that in 1 year and in 3 years and all that stuff? I think that's something that for all musicians is hard to remember to do. You get so caught up in the sort of daily struggle of, like, oh, what music are we preparing right now, and what's our touring schedule look like, and how are we getting all the instruments there, and all the stuff that goes into doing it. It's important to think about the long term. So we keep coming back to that. A couple years ago, we had these sort of goals of, like, getting a university residency and being able to work for Third Coast full time before we were doing that. And now that thankfully we've achieved those goals, which is really exciting, we have to keep looking at, like, what's next? Where do we go from here? I think this kind of relates to what Dave was just talking about if you start with why you're doing it, then that really helps to drive everything else. So we keep coming back to sort of what is our mission, and what are, like, the primary activities that are most important to us, and sort of making sure if any of those, looking for where there's opportunity to move any of those sort of pillars of Third Coast forward, thinking about what they are, and then also being aware of, like, when it feels like there's something that's getting lost in the shuffle or that's not happening, asking, like, oh, why aren't we doing more collaborations, for instance, or it looks like we don't have a particular opportunity or a thing that we're doing consistently to work with younger composers or something like that, and then we try to figure out a way to address that. So speaking of the younger composers thing, that's something that's always been really important to us, commissioning younger composers, but it's, as the schedule gets busier and busier, that's something that's easy to get lost in the fray. But a couple years ago, Sean Connors, who I think you guys had on a couple months ago as a guest, Sean, when he just joined the group, sort of came with this idea for this Emerging Composers Partnership Program, which has now become an annual recurring thing. And now that it's sort of built into our schedule, now we know that we're doing it all the time. That sort of helps. Once we build something into our schedule on a recurring basis, it helps to make sure that you're doing it. But it's just good to keep going back and looking at what are the most important things to us, and are we doing everything that we want to be doing?
I had a question to kind of spin off that. Actually, my brother works in marketing and advertising for a private school in Connecticut, And he asked a couple of Facebook questions, and I wanted to ask one for actually both of you. My brother said, is it better to focus your marketing on narrow perspective and increase your focus over time, or market more generally and narrow your focus as you find niches? For example, do you cast a single lure to try and attract a certain type of fish, or cast a wide net and take what you can get? And so with Third Coast, obviously, you're dealing with a lot of, you want to do educational programs, you want to work with composers, you want to do, you know, the classic works and all. Like, what is your strategy for, that's a lot to approach all at once? What's your long-term plan with how you balance those things out?
Yeah.
You frame that question. Great question, by the way. It's framed from a how do you want to compete? That's really a competitive question, and there are three ways to compete. One, and he mentioned two of those. One way would be to be what's called product or service differentiation. Just be better than everybody all the time, and that's really, really tough to do. We were talking about the Beatles earlier. There was probably a large part of their existence where they were just better than anybody at what they did, and that's a product service differentiation. But it wears you down. It's hard to do every day, every moment of every day. Another way to compete is on a cost differentiation basis, and that's probably not where you want to go, because I think sometimes artists, particularly musicians, already give too much stuff away, and that's what we were talking about earlier with the streaming devices and services. The third way is the way your brother just mentioned, was a niche, finding a niche, a narrow focus, a sliver of the market that no one is in. And I think, you know, Rob mentioned a mission. I think Third Coast Percussion is a mission-driven organization that has found its niche. So the mission drives Third Coast strategy, and the strategy is to carve out a niche or a very, very small sliver of the marketplace. So they're not trying to market to everyone. They're targeting to a very specific portion of the market, and they do a really, really great job of that. And generally, there's not a whole lot of competition there. So they're in there all by themselves. So if you think about John Cage or John Luther Adams, you think about Third Coast Percussion, because they position themselves that way in a niche market. And it's really a very, very effective way, and probably is the best way for individual musicians and artists to go.
And the question of competition and sort of who your target is when you're working on marketing, or the way you're presenting yourself, is really interesting for us, because I think there's a few different layers it operates at. Like, there's the layer of the audience, and sort of, you know, what are the other music interests these people might have, or what are the things that people might do on a Thursday night or something instead of going to see Third Coast Percussion play in their town, and how do you compete against that? But then there's also the question of, like, presenters are another audience. In a lot of cases, we're trying to find presenters who want to hire us to play a concert, and how do we sort of target presenters? What kind of presenters would be interested in what we do, and what draws them to us, and how do we frame ourselves or associate ourselves with certain composers or certain types of art forms, certain instruments or things that are familiar to people already, in order to sort of draw positive attention from those presenters. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the grant side of things later, but in terms of funders also, that's another type of competition. You know, who else is applying for funding from X Foundation, and how do we differentiate ourselves there?
Well, there must be a big element as well with simply what you feel okay with performing. You know, when we say marketing, we probably are thinking, okay, that's like dollars. That all amounts to dollars, and the whole point is to make dollars. But you know, we're not just a business. Third Coast is not just a business. You guys are also have this standard that you want to maintain. You don't just want to play the bubblegum, you know, some bubblegum garbage that will draw lots of crowds. You want to have this standard of integrity where you may sacrifice dollars, but you need to also live with yourself.
Yeah, totally.
And money's an important motivator, but it's not a strong long-term motivator. I mean, it allows you to do a lot of things, but it's not a good way to start. And again, getting back to what you're talking about and what Robin mentioned about a mission-driven organization, is first you find your purpose. What is your purpose? What need exists out there that you want to address? It can be in the field of music or medicine or education or whatever, but what need is out there that you have some passion or joy for? And then you design the business that will address that particular need. But then the third step, the third leg of that three-legged stool is how are you gonna what are your values? How are you gonna run this organization? What do you believe in? And what drives that joy? And all three have to work together: is purpose, business, and values. And I think it has to come in that order. Is first you identify your purpose, and that's why it takes some time for people to decide what that purpose is. And some people get it sooner, some people get it later. It doesn't matter. Just get it sometime and find it and then design a business around it. I think that's what their Ghost has done. Is they've got a really great business model that supports this purpose. And then they got a real strong value system.
Yeah, and I think for artists generally, I think it all kind of starts with the question of repertoire, style, sort of like what music are you passionate about? What's the music that you want to perform and that you want to champion? And also how broad of a spectrum of music do you want to champion? You know, I think some ensembles, classical or other genres, like find like one really specific sound, one particular kind of music or whatever that really defines them. And they sort of build it from there, and maybe sometimes expand from it or vary a little bit, but it's basically all about that one sort of sound. And I think and others, it's more of just a broad sense of repertoire. I think for us, it's been more of the latter. Like we've tended to think of ourselves more as a repertoire ensemble in the way that a great string quartet would play everything from Haydn to Bartók to modern commissions, let's say. Percussion quartet doesn't have quite that long of a history, but we're really interested in kind of covering all the bases within the history of the type of ensemble we have and sort of different styles that people are working with now. And maintaining that diversity is really important to us. Whereas other ensembles, for their own purposes, may want to really focus in on like one style and one type. Maybe it's minimalism, or maybe it's European modernism, or whatever, and that sort of defines their identity. But for us, we've tried to take the approach more of a repertoire ensemble that covers a wide range of artistic styles.
But because your audience is so narrow and so focused, you actually have a competitive advantage because you can satisfy and work towards satisfying the wants and needs of that smaller target market. In a way, you're more nimble and able to move on a dime as opposed to, say, the St. Louis Symphony, which has a very, very large, and they struggle with how do they keep this very large target market happy and satisfied.
Yeah. Orchestras are battleships, and small chamber ensembles are little speedboats.
Much more
we don't have the same amount of power, the same amount of capacity, but we can adapt very quickly and change direction.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Hey, have you guys heard, speaking of clever marketing and stuff that's in the news lately, have you guys heard of this thing called Star Wars, the new Star Wars?
What's that now?
We have this ongoing discussion about like how annoyed. Basically, the discussion is how annoyed is Casey with all this Star Wars stuff. Because I just don't understand how you can still I was a Star Wars fan. Like I had the 3 VHS movies. I had it all. I loved it. I can still quote them and everything. But dude, this is crazy. It's like, yeah, okay, that was a nice thing, but stop trying to sell cars with it. It's like a Lexus commercial, and now is just like piggybacking on Star Wars, and it's like, you know what? This was once this really nice thing, and now it's just disgusting. Is that
They have, even this, I was seeing Star Wars Day at the ballpark, and I was like, it's not even baseball season, but because it's Christmas, everyone's going to buy Cardinals tickets for Star Wars Day in July.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's really, I don't know, yeah, it just gives me this icky feeling. It's like, dude, that was this nice thing that we all enjoyed when we were younger, and I get the nostalgia of the movie. In fact, we're going to go see the movie together while we're here in Hawaii.
In a few hours, yeah.
Oh, today, yeah, that's right. We're gonna go today, and it's totally great. I'm gonna enjoy it and everything, but all the hysteria around it, it's just I do not understand. It was a nice thing, but whoa,
We should have had a Star Wars themed podcast episode.
We just wait. Once we see the movie, we'll come back next week.
I'm sure.
I'm sure. Eating a cereal.
I this is America, right? I'm sure we all have a stormtrooper outfit somewhere in our house, right? It must be. Hey, let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and move to Laurel. So Laurel, what do you got today?
Sure. Well, what I have today, in my mind, does connect to this idea of, marketing and getting out there and being brave enough to do that. I would love to have a kind of conversation about this introversion and extroversion when you're trying to become, a professional musician. And this comes from kind of 3 different books, one of which I've talked about on the podcast quite a bit, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Another called The Mastery of Music. Have any of you guys read that?
No.
The Mastery of Music?
Yeah, it's called The Mastery of Music by Barry Green, and I don't think I've read it cover to cover. I've just kind of picked and chosen throughout there. And then the last book, which I'm reading right now, is called Quiet by
I've read
Susan
that, yeah.
Cain. Yeah, and I find it really, really interesting book. And so, as I'm reading Susan Cain's book, I keep thinking about, the 7 habits and how we talked so much about being proactive. So here's her book. Casey,
By the
went
way,
to grab it.
she has a TED Talk, a pretty good TED Talk that's kind of a
Yes.
very brief version of her book.
Yeah, and that's how, I decided I wanted to read her book, was I saw the TED Talk. But yeah, we talked a lot about being proactive, and that takes a certain amount of extroversion to be able to do that. And so I'm thinking about that, and then piecing that together with something that Barry Green says in The Mastery of Music, where he kind of goes through different instruments and, in a way, the personalities and traits that people seem to have that play those particular instruments. And he says percussionists are courageous and confident. So putting that together, okay, so you have to be confident to be proactive, and then, he's played with lots of percussionists and says that they tend to be that way. And then I'm reading this book about introversion and the powers of introversion. And as a kind of self-proclaimed introvert, I started to wonder, wait, what are the strengths of both of those personality types? And it really got me thinking, and I would love to know what you guys have to say about it. But first, just to further define what introverted means, there's this tendency to think that introversion means that you're shy, and extroverted means that you're outgoing, but that's not totally the case, at least not for Susan Cain's book, and Ben, you can jump in here if you have more input on this, but essentially an introverted person is someone whose stimulation very much comes from within rather than from some external force. So a person who is extroverted would be really driven by external rewards, by adrenaline situations, and by high stakes in whatever it may be, business or personal relationships, whereas introverts can find all of that in some ways a little too much. Just a little too much to deal with, and they like a lower level of stimulation. So I was kind of making my list after reading these, each of these books, and I was thinking, okay, as a musician, things that are great in terms of being an introvert, in a way, practice is easy because you have to be by yourself, you know what I mean? Practice is simple because you don't get so bored, because you don't need to be stimulated. And you're comfortable observing things, observing a teacher or other players. You communicate well in writing, which is good for school and maybe grants, and I know if we're going to get into that in just a minute, that would be great to talk about. But then when I was getting to the strengths of an extrovert, the one thing that I have is you're not afraid to try as an extrovert. And I think, to me, that is probably the one thing that is very hard for me to do as an introvert. It's so scary to just try. So I don't know about you guys. Anybody else out there, an introvert that tries to...
I would call myself also very much a self-proclaimed introvert, as you put it. And one thing when I read that book, I kind of started thinking about, and it talks about, like Laura was talking about, practicing is a very introverted thing. It's you in a room alone. You're very focused on your, internal aspects. But it made me start thinking about different, what's the word I'm looking for, mediums of performance. And for me, I don't love playing in orchestras. I enjoy it, don't get me wrong, but it's not like my favorite thing to play in an orchestra. I love playing solo music, and I love playing chamber music. And just the whole idea of performing, I think people immediately say, like, oh, if you're performing, that makes you an extrovert. But actually being on stage alone is a very solitary experience, or with, just one or two other people. It's a very, I think, introverted thing that you're on stage alone. I feel like it's more extroverted to be in the crowd, in the audience. So that was one thing that stuck out to me reading this book, is that maybe, like, my favorite things are solo and chamber music. Maybe that's for a reason, that, I enjoy that sort of aloneness on stage.
Do you guys know?
Or a very nuanced relationship with one or two other people.
Yeah.
It's really personal. Yeah.
Do you guys know, is there any sort of ideas or theories that people have talked about introverts and extroverts and their general proclivity for improvised versus composed music? My gut instinct would be that introverts tend to be happier playing pre-composed music that they kind of develop and work up themselves. And that involves much more individual time and sort of developing it, and then going out in front of an audience knowing exactly what they're going to do to one extent or another, versus like people who get their energy from being around other people and sort of interacting with others.
Yeah.
Preferring the situation where they're going out not with a plan, but sort of just trying to feel out what's coming back to them from their fellow musicians or from the audience or whatever.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
It's probably hard to know, because it's very hard to put your finger on, like, this person is an introvert. This person is 80% introvert, 20% extrovert. But the thing I was gonna say, and I think that's a great question, like pre-composed stuff or improvisation. Which one would they kind of?
I mean, even at that though, just sticking with improvisation alone, compare Keith Jarrett to Buddy Rich. Like, Buddy Rich strikes me very much as an extrovert, and as far as his improvisation style, it was with a big band. He was the loud kind of brash leader, whereas Keith Jarrett is alone on stage very much, or with just a trio, and it's a very much more intellectual, shall we say, style of improvisation, I think. So, there could be even play within that one spectrum.
Definitely.
The place I'm going to go is, I wonder if there's any connection with people and people who have performance anxiety and people who don't, or people who are real relaxed, natural performers versus people who maybe have to work on it.
That would be a really interesting survey to take. I'm sure somebody's done some kind of work on that, but some kind of like Myers-Briggs, but for musicians, because I'm constantly thinking, cross sections of that, because I think I'm an extroverted person, but I enjoy playing in a group more, and I enjoy playing in a group more, but I also enjoy, I don't know. I'm just seeing all kinds of crosses, It'd be interesting to have some kind of survey.
See, that's the kind of stuff that you'd do in a self-analysis in the first part of a SWOT analysis as part of a marketing plan. Is in the first part of the SWOT analysis, you're looking at your strengths and you're looking at your weaknesses. And you can evaluate, do a self-assessment based on 4 or 5 different skill areas in terms of your personality and human relationship skills and work survival and just all kinds of things. And you mentioned Myers-Briggs. University of Minnesota Duluth has a great self-assessment tool on a personality sorter. But that's the kind of stuff that an artist, as a sole proprietor, as an entrepreneur, as a business person, as somebody who's creating that mission-driven organization, they need to do a real strong self-assessment and a self-analysis of the things that you're talking about.
And even on like a day-to-day level, it's good to understand. The best framing of the introvert extrovert thing that I've heard is what you were saying, Laurel. It's sort of what recharges you. Do you gain energy and gain strength by being alone or by being around other people? And I think knowing that helps you to be your best as a performer. Just understanding like, oh, I am a naturally introverted person. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to enjoy being on stage, but it means that I need to carve out time to be alone on a regular basis. And knowing that that's what's going to allow you to sort of be your best.
Right, and I noticed in school, I think, I would say most of my colleagues I was in grad school with were introverts also, which is not too surprising, really. But we would hold things really close to our chests, like new projects or new pieces or something. You didn't play it for anybody until you felt really good about it. You know, and other people can just share, like, this is where it is, I don't quite know what I'm doing, but they can share it. But I was very much like, no, I need to feel really good about this, and it has to fit like how I as an individual think, and I can't just put it out there because that's crazy, you know.
I used to use fake names on my pieces if I had to perform them. Yeah, Rob likes it. I used to, because I just had to. I was too nervous, like when I was, 18 or even a little older. It's like, okay, I'm playing the pieces really hard. I'm scared to death even just to play it, but then also to be judged on the composition side of it too is too much. Like, I don't.
So you just put Pius's name on everything.
Damn.
I'm thinking Han Solo. Maybe Han Solo would be one of the names you'd use.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And nowadays I just photocopy his music and sell it to people. It's just that's. Yeah, it works great. I'm making $12s of dollars every year selling his.
Rodney Rote Jr. wants to know, I've had mentors tell me that as a musician I must sell myself. What are your thoughts on that, and would you suggest a student to get out there while they're a student or focus on developing their skills while they're in school?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think we've probably all heard this growing up as musicians, and I feel like I heard it a lot when I was young because I was a naturally introverted person, even more so when I was younger than I am now, and I always thought like, well, what does that really mean? Or like selling yourself and all that stuff, and it's taken time to sort of understand what that means. But I think this question is a little bit like, I think the big question we all have as performers is like, as percussionists, is like, do you specialize in one thing or do you try to do as many different things as possible? And the answer is like the answer is both, and you have to figure out what the balance is for you. And so I think in this same thing, like when you're a student, are you trying to just focus on being the best musician you can be, or are you trying to also develop a skill set that involves being able to market yourself, and are you trying to find ways to get out there and be, perform more publicly versus just being in the practice room? And I think it's both, but it's finding the right balance for yourself. I think, in my opinion, the number one most important thing when you're in school is that you've got to get amazing at your craft. Because you'll just never have as much time to practice after you're done with school as you do while you're in school. Not to mention the access to facilities and to other people who are also learning and to great people to learn from and all that stuff. So it's like that's your chance. It's your job while you're in school to get amazing at your craft. That being said, like if you can find opportunities to also start making it known that that's what you do, then that's a good thing, and all the different ways that, all the different things that go into that, if you can try to take those challenges seriously, then do it. Like when it's time for you to make a graduate recital poster, like make one and make it look really cool and work on like, oh, what does it take to make a recital poster that maybe expresses what I want to express, that would actually convince someone who saw it to come see this show. Because that's a good thing to start learning. Not that you're going to make like the world's greatest music poster when you're a master's student doing your percussion recital, but you can start like thinking about those questions and seeing what it takes to actually make something. Or like if you have a friend who works at a coffee shop and the coffee shop has live music sometimes, like see if you can do some of your recital music at the coffee shop in addition to doing a recital, because you've already like worked so hard to put together this program and to be able to play this music. Like go find an appropriate place to play it, and it gives you more performance opportunities, but it also gives you an opportunity to start like understanding what that experience is like. And I think whatever it is you want to do long term, if you actually know what it is when you're in college, which not everyone does, it takes us all a while to figure out what we want to do when we grow up, but like start doing it right away, to the extent that you can. But try to just think of it as about like being present and like doing the thing that you want to do and putting it out there more than thinking about like, oh, I need to sell myself.
Yeah, and
you come back to what you're passionate about.
I deal with college students every day, and I've been doing it for 17, 18 years now. And I want to shake them when they become so presumptuous that they think they know all the answers. I think college is the time to fail, and fail in the classroom, but to try things and to find out what it is you can't do as much as the things that you can do. And my wife, Carol, Megan's mom, taught first grade for 30 some odd years and just retired. And she always said a 5 or 6 year old would come into her classroom and ask questions. They would end every sentence with a question mark. You know, why is the grass green? And you know, where do squirrels go? And whatever. And they're always asking questions. And it seems like when they get into high school, by the time they finish high school and start their college years, is they're finishing all their sentences with periods. They've stopped asking questions, and they become very presumptuous. And then when they pop out of college and get into their professional careers, it's a disaster because they've lost their curiosity. They've lost their ability to ask questions. They've just lost this wonder and awe of the world. And when you get to my age, and I'm sounding like I'm really old, but when you get to my age, we're guilty. We feel worse about our sins of omission than we do of the sins of commission. And I think college is a time to fail. And then getting back to the marketing and that SWOT analysis is because you're trying to analyze what is it you do well and what is it you don't do well is just as important, because then you can set your goals and objectives to shore up those things you don't do so well and to fix those things. And I think high school and particularly college is the time to do it, and early in your career.
yeah, and I just wanted to say, like, kind of going along with this, one thing my brother talks a lot about in marketing and advertising is a lot of people think exposure is a good thing. Like, let me really get my name out there. But it doesn't really mean anything if there's not anything you're selling behind that, if there's not anything worthwhile behind it. So I think that, you know, if I look back when I was 18 years old, I really wanted to, like, you know, put myself out there and all, but there wasn't really anything worth putting out there at that point in my life. I was, you know, developing. I was young, of course, like we all were. And so, yeah, I think the idea of putting yourself out there, like the question was asking about, and selling yourself is very important, but you also have to make sure that you actually have something, you know, you've found some sort of niche or something that you're trying to push out there, rather than just, you know, here's my recording of Yellow After the Rain or my, you know, snare drum etude or something like that on YouTube.
You know, you intuitively understand marketing because you've backed up from selling, which is promotion, back to product development. And so before you start selling anything, you got to make sure you've got some kind of product and some kind of you know, quality product that you in fact can promote.
Before you think about how do I sell myself, think about like what's the project that I want to do in addition to all of the things that I need to do for school. And start like figuring that out and trying things out and failing and just figuring out what it is that you really love with all the different options that are out there as a musician.
I just want to say on that note, all of the people that I've seen be most successful going through school are the ones that absolutely nail down everything they're supposed to do in school with practicing for their lessons and juries and so on, but then also have that one thing that they're just crazy about and completely go for, whether it's starting a percussion trio or being an awesome marimba soloist or taking orchestral auditions. Like the people that can nail down everything they're supposed to do through school, and then additionally, you know, have that one niche that they start to get into is, you know, that's, in my opinion, how you start a career getting out of school.
Yeah. So, looks like Casey's saying something.
A little audio issue, maybe.
I'm again just gonna guess what he's saying.
It's time for our daily charades.
And one other topic we definitely want to get to before the end of the hour is talking about grants, since both of these have a lot of experience writing grants in different genres, kind of. But first I wanted to ask my dad, who we were both involved in a local fife and drum corps when I was growing up, and that was where I got a lot of my music education from. And my dad was president of it for a long time, and we ended up being, it was called the Lewis and Clark Fife and Drum Corps, and we became the official corps of
Signature corps.
the signature corps of the Lewis and Clark bicentennial celebration, which was happening when we were both involved. And we're able to kind of latch on to this national celebration. And I think that opened us up for more grant opportunities nationally. But I'm curious, locally, for maybe not similar groups, but just groups that are looking for local grants, where do you start to look?
Oh, well, I think, again, it gets back to that mission-driven organizations, find people who, if you're, and our Fife and Drum Corps certainly had a very, very small niche, just a tiny sliver of the market, and you're talking about introverted versus extroverted. We were very introverted when we first got involved. I mean, we were playing birthday parties and backyard barbecues and all these other kind of crazy things, and we finally discovered what our marketing niche was and how we could play to that. And so what we did was identify groups and organizations that shared that kind of passion, joy, for the mission that we had. And so it could be national groups, it could be local groups, whether they're historical in nature or music groups or whatever, but people who just really, really shared that passion. And that's what you guys do with Third Coast, is you find people who really, really want to share that passion, and they're willing to pay you to perform for them. And your passion and joy for what it is you do is just it's contagious. And I think that's what's with our Fife and Drum Corps, is people just really felt how excited we were about what we did, and we were just trying to kind of line up what it is we provided in terms of our marketing mix with our target market.
Yeah, and like private foundations and government agencies that support the arts, they all have their own missions too. They each have their reason to exist, and when you understand why they exist and what they're going for, that's helpful in sort of securing funding. Sometimes the funding is something that's there to sort of be applied for, and so there are, like, specific foundations that a lot of music groups know. Oh, they support performances of contemporary American music, or they support chamber music, or whatever. But then, it can be interesting when you start collaborating with people who are outside of your field, or just having something that has implications beyond your field. Like, Fife and Drum Corps has all these historical implications. Right. Then you can start looking at, are there organizations that are specifically dedicated to the history, who aren't thinking about music, but if I can reach out to them, they'll be really interested in what we're doing. If they have finances to support it, they can support it that way, or they might be interested in supporting it promotionally or whatever. And so for Third Coast, if we're commissioning a composer who is of a specific cultural heritage, we're working with an Irish composer, let's say, we can reach out to an Irish American Heritage Center about, do they have anything to offer to support it or to promote it or whatever, things like that. Or if we're doing project that's inspired by, we did this Gerard Grisey piece a few years ago, Le Noir de l'Etoile. It's a really amazing 6-player percussion piece where you surround the audience, and we performed it at the planetarium in Chicago, the Adler Planetarium, which is an awesome space. It was cool because the whole piece is inspired by pulsars, and so which is this astrological phenomenon. So it's very cool to sort of make that connection, and they have this amazing facility. At the time, I don't know that we would have been able to find a way to perform in such a cool space otherwise, but because there's sort of this thematic connection that sort of brings them onto the team. So thinking about sort of what are the implications for the art that I'm creating or the projects that I'm doing beyond just I'm a musician doing this music, what are the connections, and sort of just starting to search for things. And that's a lot easier to do now than it was 20 years ago, I'm sure, thanks to the internet.
I think one of the keys to successful grant writing and finding this kind of money is knowing what price you want to charge. And price is not based on, and this is one of the 4 P's of marketing, price is not what it costs to deliver a product. Price is what the perceived value of the product is. And that's what you have to get at. So whether it's, whatever organization is that's giving those grants, and they do have money, you have to, again, link up your mission with their mission. And if you can link that up, you've struck at the heart of the pricing secret, which is, how do they value this? What kind of value can you deliver? And so you can charge more that way.
I have a question for Rob regarding what we're talking about here with price and all. when you start a contemporary percussion quartet, obviously you're probably not going to be making tons and tons of money right off the bat. So when you started, what would you say your balance was of, like, we'll say paid to unpaid gigs, your ratio, and then as it's progressed, like, I'm sure at this point Third Coast does not play for free for the almost entirely for the majority of your work. So how did that progression go for you?
Yeah, right. It was probably a couple of years before we got paid to do anything, and then it was a couple more years after that where we were bringing in enough revenue that none of the four of us had to put money into Third Coast Percussion anymore. It was actually I just a nice cross promotion. I just posted an article on our blog. We've been doing all this series of articles on our blog to celebrate our 10th anniversary this year. And this one was sort of just like big game-changing moments in the history of Third Coast Percussion. And one of them was the moment when we all got to stop paying to be in Third Coast Percussion. And that was actually because of a specific grant. We got our first grant was from the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation in Chicago. And they gave us a grant that was an operating grant that was large enough to cover the rent on our rehearsal space. We'd been in the space for about a year at that point. It was like a huge necessity to actually have a place of our own to store instruments and rehearse and all this stuff. But up to that point, we were paying that rent out of our pockets, split between the four of us. And then this grant sort of like made that difference. The point, okay, we don't have to do that anymore. And then. So that was about, I think, 4 years into the group's existence. And then 8 years into the group's existence is when it got to the point where we could all, we could and we had to leave our other jobs to just do Third Coast full time because the schedule was rigorous enough we couldn't do our other jobs well and do everything Third Coast was doing, and the budget was like just barely big enough for the organization that we could afford to pay a meager living salary, so we could all do that. So that was sort of that curve, and with every performance opportunity, and this is talking more about earned income, I guess, if we're talking about like fees for performance, rather than contributed income that comes from a foundation or individual giving or things like that. But in terms of earned income, there's always this kind of balance of like, what is the just the like cash performance fee, or what are we getting paid to do it? But then also, what are the other benefits? If there are non-tangible, non-cash benefits to doing a particular performance or other project or whatever, you sort of weigh that in the balance and you try to figure out at the end of the day, okay, well, it only pays this much, which is a lot less than we usually ask for a gig, but there are these other benefits, and so at the end of the day, is it worth it? And it's a conversation that's always ongoing. And sort of trying to, again, think long-term about where we want the organization to be in another 5 years.
Price you pay, the price you charge, the income you receive has a direct impact on the respect you have for the brand. And if the brand is strong, if the product is strong, and the brand is strong, then you can charge almost anything. And that's why pricing and product and promotion and place distribution all have to work together. It all has to be synergistic. That's what you guys are working towards.
We're working.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Bill Schultz wants to know if there are any specific sources for grants that fund solo and/or group artistic projects. I know you mentioned that it's a lot easier to search now, but are there any specific places you recommend?
I can give you two things maybe that everyone should look into out there if they have projects that they're thinking about doing or trying to fund. One of the big things for an organization like us is that we are a specific kind of organization. We're a 501c3, which is a tax-exempt thing that makes us eligible for a lot of grants, especially like larger foundation grants and government money that we would not be eligible for without that status. So that's a whole extra level of commitment to what you're doing that you have to sort of get through. But for people who are not at that, who are not, either are not at that point yet or are not ever going to do that specifically with the project that they're trying to fund, there's an organization called New Music USA that I don't believe requires that you're a 501c3 and has a lot of different options. They fund projects at all sorts of different levels and have a specific emphasis on smaller grant requests also. So they sort of set aside a certain chunk of money to fund requests of, I think it's under $3,000 or something like that. So that's a good one for everyone to check out. It's very open. They have a couple of deadlines a year for different projects. Another thing to be aware of is that for organizations that are not a 501c3 or individuals who are trying to do something on their own, there's something called fiscal sponsorship that you can sometimes find a 501c3 to essentially sponsor your application for something that would require a 501c3 status. And there's a great organization called Fractured Atlas that people can look into that often provides fiscal sponsorship for other artistic endeavors.
Many organizations have art commissions, one here in St. Charles, and they usually have grants. Arts here is in the amounts of about $5,000.
Yeah,
Laurel, you started to say something. I think we lost you right when you started to talk.
Oh, yeah, I could just get it out there real quick. When we were talking about price and value and what you could charge and how to know what to apply for in a grant, like as someone who has looked into grants a lot and only worked on large applications for like larger ensembles, it's hard to know. And even like as an individual, you know, trying to break into a scene or something, or as a new group, it's hard to know what to charge or like what your niche is. And what I was going to say at the time is where we've just moved to Harrisonburg, I just decided I'm just going to try to accompany people as a freelance accompanist. And I just picked a rate that I thought was okay with my, you know, my level of piano ability, and it turns out it's lower than some of the other people around. And in just a few short months, I've kind of gotten this reputation of like, I don't charge a lot, and
you learn your music.
But I learn the music.
Yeah.
And I practice it.
What a crazy marketing technique.
Yeah.
For a
good product.
Revolutionary.
It's kind of funny because there's one other person in particular that I'm thinking of who is excellent, but charges a lot and isn't particularly friendly. At least not to me.
Talking about
it's
me.
Him. Yeah. And, like, what's interesting is the students I've played for, their teachers have said that they perform better when I play for them. Even though I'm not nearly as good as a pianist, it's like the vibe that I have, this, which I didn't know was my niche market, was like my particular skill. Evidently my vibe is really relaxed and chill, and it allows the students to perform better than they usually do. So,
in the marketing business, that's called value added. You have value added.
Value added?
Value added. Mm-hmm. The makeup of your personality and how you relate to your students and people you're accompanying, if you can do that somehow better than someone else, that's a value added part of your product. Products come in layers. People don't buy products just in one thing, one dimension. Products, all products, so whether it's Third Coast or Lewis and Clark Fife and Drum Corps or musicians or whatever, they're all multidimensional, and you have to identify the various product layers. And that's value added. That's just that little something extra that has value, and therefore you can establish a price for that value.
It's sort of like when we were talking about the recordings earlier in the show. For some people, like having a recording of something is just about being able to hear the music. But then for some people, like having a physical product in their hand, a thing that they can look at and hold is a part of the value of the product,
right.
Or or the fidelity of the audio is a thing, or the liner notes or whatever are all extra things that hold extra value for some people, but not for everyone.
Right.
Yeah, and one thing we've come across several times is with music, like you have to be good at what you do, but you just have to be nice. You can't be a jerk. And I've had several gigs with this one choir in the South Florida area, and every single time they hand me something and they make this ridiculous request for, can you improvise a timpani part for this? And I just, sure, every single time, sure I can, and don't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
Dude, I would lose my mind. I would lose my freaking mind.
And we're finding there are different levels of niceness here too. So.
Right, yeah. Speaking of that extra added value, we had Jeff Mulvihill from Majestic Mapex on in our last episode, and something that I never really got to say about them is they're not. When they approached me first, they were not product pushy. they kind of, when I feel like I can freely talk about other products with them, and they'll just say like, oh yeah, man, those marimbas are killer. And they will say what's great about other instruments, and I'll say, oh man, I have this thing right now that I just really love, and they'll be like, oh yeah, man, did you know that on the shells of those they do this extra procedure where they do X, Y, and Z, and it's really thoughtful and clever, and yeah, man, those guys are really, and it sells me on them, on Majestic, so much more the way they complement what they see good about other brands, whereas I see other companies do the exact opposite. They say like, oh yeah, but that won't hold up. It might sound like that to you right here, but actually it sounds like crap out in the hall, or they'll like totally bag on other stuff to promote themselves.
There's I won't name any names, but there's one, I'll say, salesman at PASIC for a very prominent percussion manufacturer that if you go by this booth every single year, he is just trash talking every single other instrument there, and I think from the laughs I'm seeing, everyone knows exactly what I'm referring to. But yeah, it's like like Sabian and Zildjian both make great cymbals, and I've never heard anyone from either of those companies say that oh, every Sabian cymbal is terrible, because that's just not true. They're not. So yeah, I think if you're open enough to say this other company might have a good product, then you probably realize what's good about that, and maybe even improve upon it in your own product for next year.
It's a great marketing technique. And I don't know if they do it on purpose necessarily, but it just feels, it's really nice, it's really genuine, and you feel like you can just talk to them. You don't feel like you can't talk good about other products, and yeah, I don't know, it's really, really nice. You guys, I hope I'm coming through okay, but thank you so much for the episode. Rob and Mr. Arns, thank you so much. Merry Christmas to the Arns family. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
We suggested an episode on food for musicians, and Carol could be a special guest.
Yeah, we need that. Musicians are like crazy unhealthy.
Absolutely.
You guys, thank you all so much, and you all have a good one and a great rest of the break, and I'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you. It was a blast talking to you all.
Right. Happy New Year. Ben, I'll see you at home, buddy, all right?
See.